behind the thick stone walls of Balmoral Castle, far away from the cameras, the crowds, and the carefully choreographed royal life the world saw. There was a small wooden drawer that almost no one ever opened. It wasn't filled with jewels. It didn't hold state papers or handwritten speeches. Inside that locked drawer sat something so ordinary, so fragile, that no one would ever expect it to be kept by the most powerful woman in the modern monarchy. A tiny hospital bracelet, thin, faded, slightly bent with age, and for 55 years, Queen Elizabeth II reportedly kept it there, quietly, deliberately, as if it carried a secret too personal for the crown. So why would a queen, who lived surrounded by priceless artifacts and centuries of royal history, hold on to something so small for more than half a century? And why keep it hidden away at Balmoral, her most private refuge, instead of Buckingham Palace? The answer isn't found in official biographies or polished documentaries. It lives in whispers, in moments the cameras never captured, and in a side. Of Queen Elizabeth, the public rarely got to see to understand the weight of that bracelet. You have to go back to a time when the Queen wasn't thinking about legacy, but about survival. By the late 1960s. Queen Elizabeth II had already been on the throne for more than a decade. The image she projected to the world was one of total control, calm, disciplined, unshakable. But behind the scenes, the pressure was relentless. Political unrest, assassinations of world leaders, the Cold War, the slow unraveling of the British Empire. And on top of it all, the burden of being a woman expected to show no weakness in a role built for men. Then, suddenly, her body forced her to stop in 1968. The Queen underwent what the palace described as a minor operation. The wording was deliberately vague, almost dismissive. The public was reassured she was fine. Business would continue as usual, but insiders later suggested it wasn't minor to her for the first time since ascending the throne. Queen Elizabeth found herself not as a monarch, but as a patient, stripped of ceremony, no crown, no carefully chosen words. It's just a hospital bed, bright lights, and doctors making decisions about her body. And that's when the bracelet came into her life. Hospitals issue bracelets for a simple reason: identification, name, date of birth, sometimes a number. To most people, it's a temporary inconvenience. It's cut off and thrown away without a second thought. But for the Queen, that bracelet symbolized something she almost never allowed herself to feel: vulnerability. Imagine it. A woman who had been taught from childhood to never complain, never explain, suddenly reduced to a name on plastic. Not Your Majesty, not Head of State, just Elizabeth. Those close to her would later say that the experience changed her in subtle but lasting ways. She never spoke publicly about fear or pain, but something about that hospital stay stayed with her. And when she was discharged, instead of letting the bracelet be discarded, she kept it, not displayed, not preserved as a royal artifact, locked away. Balmoral Castle was always different from the other royal residences. This wasn't a palace designed for appearances. It was where the Queen walked her dogs, wore headscarves, and laughed without worrying about posture or protocol. It was where she was most herself. And somewhere inside Balmoral, that bracelet rested in a drawer that very few people even knew existed. Over the years, aides noticed something curious. The Queen was meticulous about objects. She didn't hoard. She didn't cling to sentimental clutter. Nearly everything she owned had a purpose. And when that purpose ended, the object usually did too. But not this. Every few years, sometimes after a long walk or a quiet evening, she would ask for the drawer to be unlocked. Not to show anyone, just to look. Those who witnessed it said she never lingered long. No tears, no dramatic pauses. It's just a brief moment of stillness, as if she were grounding herself in something deeply personal. Some believe the bracelet reminded her of mortality. Others think it marked the moment she truly understood the cost of the crown, not in titles or duty, but in how alone the role could be when things went wrong. Remember, This was a woman who lived through World War II, whose father died young from the strain of the throne, whose sister battled lifelong health issues, and whose family would later endure very public scandals and tragedies. The bracelet wasn't about the hospital. It was about the realization that even a queen is not untouchable. As the decades passed, the world around her changed dramatically. Prime ministers came and went. Technology transformed daily life. The monarchy itself faced criticism, reinvention, near collapse at various points. Through it all, Queen Elizabeth remained steady, unemotional in public, consistent, reliable, but behind closed doors, the bracelet remained a silent witness to every era of her reign, during particularly difficult moments after family scandals. Political upheaval or personal losses, some insiders believe she revisited that drawer more often. Not out of sadness, but perspective. It reminded her that power is temporary, control is an illusion, and life, no matter how privileged, can change in an instant. There's something deeply human about that. Think about it. Out of all the things she could have saved from her extraordinary life, letters from world leaders, gifts from foreign kings, historic documents, she chose a cheap strip of plastic that marked a moment when she had no control at all. And she kept it for 55 years. Not for historians, not for the public, not even for her family, just for herself. As she aged, the bracelet reportedly became more fragile, its ink fading, the plastic yellowing with time. Some suggested it should be preserved properly, archived like everything else associated with the Queen. She refused. Because once it became an artifact, it would no longer be what it truly was. A reminder. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, many wondered what would happen to the deeply personal items she had kept hidden from the world. The bracelet was never listed. In any public inventory, it wasn't displayed. It wasn't mentioned in official statements, and that feels intentional. Some stories aren't meant for museums. They're meant to stay quiet in a life defined by ceremony, silence, and service. That tiny hospital bracelet may have been the one thing that belonged only to Elizabeth the woman, not the Queen. A small piece of plastic that carried a lifetime of meaning. And maybe that's the most powerful symbol of all. What makes this story even more haunting is how carefully Queen Elizabeth separated her public life from her private one. The world knew her as a symbol, a constant, a figure who seemed almost immune to time, illness, and emotional cracks. Yet that bracelet existed as quiet proof that none of that was entirely true. There's a reason hospitals use bracelets instead of names spoken aloud. In those halls, everyone is equal. Pain doesn't care about titles. Fear doesn't recognize crowns. And for the Queen lying in that hospital bed, the reality of that truth may have hit harder than any political crisis ever could. Royal aides later hinted that she asked very specific questions during her stay. Not about comfort, not about special treatment, but about procedure, risks, outcomes. What would happen if things didn't go as planned? Those weren't the questions of a monarch. They were the questions of a woman confronting the idea that her reign and her life were not guaranteed. When she returned to public duties, the transition was seamless. No emotional speeches. No personal reflections. Just the Queen back at work, waving crowds and opening Parliament as if nothing had happened. But something had changed inside. People who worked closely with her noticed a subtle shift. She became more patient in private moments, more reflective, less hurried when she was away from cameras. Balmoral, especially, became sacred in a new way. That's where the bracelet stayed, locked away, but never forgotten. Over the years, Balmoral saw moments of both joy and heartbreak. It was where the Queen relaxed with her children when they were young, where she escaped the rigid structure of palace life, and later, where she processed some of the most painful chapters of her reign, family fractures, the loss of people she loved deeply. Through it all, that bracelet remained unchanged. Even as everything else evolved, some royal historians believe the bracelet also symbolized something else: continuity. A reminder that before she was queen, she was human, and that after the crown, that humanity still mattered. Think about how rare that is. Most of us measure our lives by milestones, birthdays, weddings, achievements. But sometimes the moments that define us most aren't the ones we celebrate. They're the ones that scare us. It's the moments where everything feels uncertain. For Queen Elizabeth, that hospital stay may have been one of those moments, and instead of burying it, she preserved it quietly, not as a weakness, but as a truth in later years. As her health began to decline and the public speculated endlessly about her condition, the bracelet's meaning likely deepened even more. It had witnessed the beginning of her understanding of mortality, and now sat beside the closing chapters of her life. Yet even then, she never allowed that vulnerability to become public. No interviews, no confessions, just silence. And perhaps that silence was her final act of control, choosing what the world could see, what it never would. After her death, historians and royal watchers searched desperately for hidden letters, diaries, and secret messages that might reveal her inner world. They wanted something dramatic, something explosive, but what they got instead were small, quiet details like this: a bracelet, a drawer, a castle in the Scottish Highlands, and suddenly the Queen felt closer, more real, less like a symbol carved into history, and more like a woman who understood that even the strongest lives are built around fragile moments in a world obsessed with grand gestures. Queen Elizabeth's most powerful reminder to herself wasn't grand at all. It was tiny, and that might be why it lasted 55 years. Disclaimer: the content in this video is based on publicly available information, media sources, and opinions. It is created for entertainment and educational purposes only. We do not claim or guarantee that every detail is 100% accurate.